Yes. Welcome everyone to the launch of the Asia and Pacific's SDG Progress Report for 2022. This year's edition of the flagship annual publication by ESCAP has been produced in partnership with 10 other UN agencies. One thing is for certain, the need, as the key findings highlight, the need, oh, sorry about that. The need to support those who are furthest behind has never been greater. Without further ado, here is the opening remarks from Ms. Armida Salsiah Alisjahbana, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP.
Dear colleagues, welcome to the launch of the Asia and the Pacific SDG Progress Report 2022, Widening Disparities Amid COVID-19. The report provides an update on current progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in the Asia-Pacific region. This year, we work with our colleagues from 10 UN agencies: ILO, IOM, UNEP, UNESCO, UNDP, UNFPA, UNHCR, UNICEF, UNODC, and UN Women. We provide an analysis of progress for different population groups that may be in a vulnerable situation due to intersecting development challenges. Please allow me now to highlight some key results from the report. The progress gap for achieving the SDGs grows wider in Asia and the Pacific, and the prospect of achieving the goals now extends a few decades beyond 2030. We, as a region, are not on track to achieve any of the 17 goals, and in fact, vulnerabilities are even increasing for some population groups. At the regional level, our report shows the following. Although there has been significant progress on industry, innovation, and infrastructure, or Goal 9, and affordable and clean energy, or Goal 7, this progress is insufficient to meet the respective goals. Progress on quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, sustainable cities and communities, and life below water has been very slow or even stagnant. The region is moving in a reverse direction on climate action and responsible consumption and production. At the sub-regional level, distinct challenges and priorities have been identified. East and Northeast Asia is the only sub-region on track to achieve two goals: no poverty, which is Goal 1, and industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which is Goal 9. Every sub-region has regressed on climate action, or Goal 13, and responsible consumption and production, or Goal 12. I'm pleased to recognize that the 2020 report also provides analysis to better understand development outcomes for distinct population groups and intersecting vulnerabilities, which is key to a fairer recovery from the pandemic. The results clearly show that average progress in the region disproportionately excludes some groups with distinct demographic or socioeconomic characteristics, in particular, children, women, refugees and migrants, persons with disabilities, older persons, those in vulnerable employment situations, and populations facing multiple deprivation. With this brief background, we will share more detailed findings of progress at the regional level. This will be followed by a deep dive session at the sub-regional level to be led by ESCAP 5 sub-regional offices. Finally, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation and thanks to our partners in the United Nations system who have contributed to the preparation of this report. Thank you very much. I now would like to officially launch the Asia and Pacific SDG Progress Report 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Alisjahbana. Unfortunately, our Director of Statistics, Ms. Rachel Bevan, is unable to join us today, but I would now like to invite Mr. Arman Bidarbakht from ESCAP Statistics Division to present the region-wide analysis of this year's progress report and share with us where positive progress has been made and where additional effort is needed in Asia and the Pacific. Arman?
Thank you, Kavita. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen from Bangkok. I have the pleasure to present highlights from the Asia Pacific SDG Progress Report 2022, Widening Disparities amid COVID-19 to you. This is the sixth of the series of SDG reports that ESCAP has produced since adoption of the agenda. This year, ESCAP has partnered with 10 other UN agencies in the region to produce this report, as you heard from ES's opening remark, and you can see on the screen. Let me first share the key findings of the report. New evidence shows that the region has made insufficient progress since 2015. And in fact, progress has slowed down. At the current pace, none of the 17 SDGs will be achieved, but some good progress was made on industry, innovation, and infrastructure, Goal 9, and affordable and clean energy, Goal 7. But it is still slow. The region has regressed on climate action, Goal 13, and responsible consumption and production. And finally, data shows that some groups and some subregions actually are disproportionately excluded in the overall progress. Now, how are we doing as a region? Let us have a look at overall progress over time. In 2017, region had made only 4.4% of the progress needed. And with that speed, we could only hope to achieve the SDGs in 2052. But over time, the progress has slowed down. In 2021, we made only 12% of the needed progress. With this rate, we should expect at least 3.5 decades of delay in achieving the SDGs, unless the region can pick up the pace. Now, let us see how we're doing on each of the 17 goals. To be on track, the bar must at least reach the 2021 line on this graph. We are not on track to achieve any of the goals by 2030, but some good progress has been made on Goal 7 and Goal 9. On most of the other goals, progress is too slow or stagnant, and in fact, the region is moving on the wrong direction on climate action and responsible consumption and production, proving that our progress is not environmentally sustainable. What will happen to our 169 targets if we continue our business as usual? It is likely that we only achieve this 10 targets shown in green if progress can be maintained. Majority of targets highlighted in yellow will be missed for Asia and the Pacific by 2030 unless we accelerate. And targets that need a complete U-turn are those in red, and we still cannot measure progress on almost 1/3 of the targets, shown in gray. This highlights a significant data gap for SDG progress assessment. Analysis also shows an uneven progress across 5 ESCAP subregions. There are both similarities and differences. Some goals, such as 12 and 13, every subregion is regressing, but there are also some other goals that are specific to each sub-region. So each sub-region has their own individual priorities. More will be discussed right after this plenary session about each of the 5 sub-regions. The report has also taken a deep dive to identify population groups in most vulnerable situation and, when data allows, impact of pandemic on them. For instance, we found that 15 to 64% of women experience physical and or sexual violence at the hands of intimate partners over lifetime. And 32 million of children are affected by wasting. Also, over 10% are out of school in lower secondary age, with girls in rural areas and poor households being more disadvantaged. The Asia-Pacific region hosts 19% of the world total refugee population, and also death and disappearance of migrants has increased in 2021. Only 21.6% of persons with severe disabilities obtain disability cash benefits. And some races and castes or ethnic groups are 10 times more likely to be multidimensionally poor. And finally, 8.2% of working hours were lost in 2020. These are only a few findings that you can find in our disparity analysis chapter in this report. Results from analysis of data gaps and data sources are also interesting. First, for the first time, more than half of the 2031 SDG indicators have sufficient data in Asia Pacific. It has actually doubled since 2017. This is a good news. But looking at each goal rings a few alarms. Gender equality, life below water, and peace, justice, and strong institutions are 3 goals with very little indicators with enough data. Now, where SDG data come from? Analysis of data sources shows that 1/3 of indicators are produced through international reporting, which is a collaboration between national focal points and custodian agencies. Second and third main sources of data are household surveys and administrative data. Gaps, you can see on this graph in the gray areas, that gap exists across all sources, and this calls for a greater partnership and investment for SDG statistics. Thank you very much. You can access to the report using this QR code. I'm happy to take any questions. Back to you, Kavita.
Thank you, Arman. Those are indeed some alarming trends and definitely an indicator that the region really needs to come together to accelerate action towards the SDGs and ensure a fairer recovery for all. So we will now take on some questions from the audience. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. Arman will be taking on questions related to the region-wide analysis. However, if you have national or sub-regional specific questions, please keep them for the sub-regional sessions, and those will be addressed there. So some of you have sent us questions in advance, so we'll begin with those, Arman, if you may. All right, so given the impact of COVID and other recent crises, what are the policy options for countries to recover and achieve the SDGs?
Thank you for the question. The pandemic, combined with other human-made and natural disasters, will definitely have adverse impact on achieving the SDGs. This report clearly points to some areas for policy priorities. It is obvious that we need to step up fulfilling our environmental commitments to begin with. This is urgent and necessary to save the SDGs. Data shows we continue subsidizing fossil fuel. Greenhouse gas emissions continue to grow. Material footprint is increasing. Natural disasters have high toll on societies and economies. our use of water resources is not sustainable, and we still have not managed to even produce minimum necessary data on health of oceans. This is only to name a few areas that need urgent attention. At the same time, report raises many red flags that many governments are not investing enough on people. For instance, share of health and education government expenditure is still below the target. Food insecurity is increasing, and actually it's expected to further increase due to recent crises. Education outcomes are poor, and access to education is not equal. Household expenditure on health is also increasing. Of course, with shrinking fiscal space, you may wonder, how we can address these issues. But of course, without smarter and more diversified financing, including from private sector, it's not possible. This report is a statistical report, but it provides lots of evidence on priority areas under each of the goals. If you look at chapter 1, but ESCAP economic and social survey which will come out in April, will provide a lot more insight into the policy aspects.
All right, thanks for that, Arman. So obviously the report focuses on the widening disparities. This is one of the main alarming trends that has been highlighted. But what are the areas that disparity has increased, and in which areas has it actually decreased? What can we do to close these gaps?
Thanks again. This is a good question. I would like to refer you to chapter 3 of the report, which provides a detailed assessment of inequalities and groups in vulnerable situation. If you look at specifically, if you look at table 3.1 in chapter 3, inequality picture is mixed. For instance, under education, there is a lot more inequality in tertiary education than in early childhood education, or in energy domain, inequality is much higher in access to clean fuel compared to access to electricity. But we need to keep in mind multidimensional nature of deprivations, and that's what this chapter is about. It is often several characteristics that together create vulnerabilities, and basic univariate disaggregations are not often enough to fully understand them. So we need to provide a lot more detailed assessment to understand them. With the evidence provided here in this report on several population groups, including women, children, migrants and refugees, older persons, persons with disabilities, as well as people with multiple deprivations, it is clear that national policies need to do a lot more in protecting and supporting and empowering those groups. The leave no one behind should be at the center of SDG implementation. We either fail the SDGs or achieve them for all and everywhere. I don't know a third option for that. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that highlight, Arman. So the third question that we have is, obviously there's a lot about vulnerable groups being talked about in this report as well. So how can we address the issues of vulnerable groups, particularly such as persons with disabilities, women and children, so on?
Thanks. This question, part of this question was already answered in my previous question, but let me expand a little bit more. First of all, a big part of vulnerabilities are still invisible to us. We need a lot more data to better understand them. Policies need to clearly specify target population groups, and governments have to invest in producing timely, disaggregated statistics to understand vulnerabilities, first of all. At the same time, we don't know fully the extent to which our decision-making is participatory. data is very limited on participation of certain groups in decision making. But still, we have some evidence proving that some groups are left behind. As I presented, only 22% of persons with disabilities, with severe disabilities, receive cash benefits. And at the same time, persons with disabilities have significantly less employment opportunities compared to others. Or in the case of children, 10% in lower secondary age were out of school. And we know girls in rural and poor households are even more likely to be out of school. So these are all vulnerabilities, and we know these groups suffer more in times of crisis like now, and need to be protected. Thank you. Over to you, Kavita.
Thanks, Arman. So we have a question from our colleague Bishwa at UNDP, and he asks, international reporting has been presented as the very first important source of data for tracking SDG progress. However, ultimate sources of data is national data, such as household surveys, admin data, among others, which also provide data for reporting from the international agencies. So I'm sure this response will be of interest to our national statistics colleagues. Any reactions, Arman?
Thank you, Bishwa, who is one of the contributors to this report. A very good question. First of all, I need to highlight that the international data, the global SDG data, which is the primary source for this report, is collected by custodian agencies, but through national coordination. These are mostly national data. But in this report, of course, we only assess progress at the regional and sub-regional level, because only at this level it makes sense to have a common target. We encourage and we also support, together with our UN colleagues at country level, governments to use their own data, their own indicators, set their own targets to assess progress, to better understand their progress, and also the result will be a lot more relevant to national policy making. A new tool developed by ESCAP, National SDG Tracker, which is being rolled out in few countries, is available to all governments, and it is facilitating that kind of activity, using your indicators, your targets, your data to produce progress assessment. But this international data is also coming from countries.
Right. So this is a particularly interesting question, Arman, and hopefully you can take it on. So Pradeep from GCAP is asking, we are making progress in clean energy, but going back on climate change. Does this mean that clean energy is not the only solution for checking climate change that many are arguing now? Your reactions, Arman?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question, and thanks for asking that. What I presented is a very broad view of the progress. I encourage you to look at the report and see the detailed assessment of each of the goals. And you will see that specifically on this goal, affordable and clean energy, there are certain indicators responsible for making progress that are not necessarily about increasing the use of clean energy. There is some increase in the investment. There is lots of achievements in access to electricity. Those all contribute. But the report also highlights the fact that we need to do a lot more on providing access to clean energy. And that is still one of the areas that we are lagging behind, and that contributes to our regression on environmental aspect. Thank you.
Right. So the other question that we also have, is there a global plan to review targets of SDGs, as achieving the current SDGs looks impossible by 2030? So this question is from Saki in Cambodia.
Well, I think the entire UN agenda is evolving around this, and there is if you wanted to know the status of progress at the global level, I would like to refer you to Secretary General's SDG Progress Report that is presented to General Assembly every year. And that highlights the areas for which, at the global level, we need to accelerate. And the evidence is provided to decision makers, and at that level, the same thing that we are doing at the regional level is taking place at the global level.
Heike is asking, how can we encourage more private sectors to participate in the SDGs? Any thoughts?
Again, as I said, I don't think we can achieve SDGs without getting them involved. This is one of the, as I said, especially in this time of shrinking fiscal space, we have to diversify the way we finance sustainable development. Private sector is one of the important areas to tap in, but also it's not only financing, it's also mindset shift that need to take place in terms of sustainable development. Thanks, Kavita.
Sure. So Arman, we've obviously received a lot of questions related to the national tracking for SDGs. Could you maybe share, do you receive data from the national level, especially for SDG 13, SDG 12, or how can participants or delegates who are watching actually go and look for these national data?
Thanks again. This is also a very good question. ESCAP, Asia Pacific SDG Gateway. I asked my colleagues to share the link in the chat box. Asia Pacific SDG Gateway provides you with national trends on SDG data. And these are exactly the same data you're providing to the custodian agencies and are being collected at the global level, maintained by DESA on global SDG database. These are we don't collect data directly from countries to avoid any duplication. This is the responsibility of custodian agencies for each indicator. And if you would like to know who is custodian agency and who is the focal point from your country for each of those indicators, I suggest to have a look at SDG page on DESA Statistics Division. They have a list of focal points. They have all data. They have metadata. Again, I asked my colleagues to post that link as well so that you can see how data flows in your country and entire journey of your data going to sit on global database. Thank you.
So I think we have time for one more question before we head on to the sub-regional sessions. I'll take on a question from Dulce here. So what is or are the reasons behind why 34% of the targets still cannot be measured?
Again, a good question. Chapter 4 of this report, for the first time, provides an analysis, not only availability of data or data gap, but also a detailed analysis of the sources of data. As I shown in my last slide, the top contributor to SDG data is actually 1/3 of data coming from this national and international collaboration to produce data. Basically, agencies providing questionnaires or through web interfaces collect data from countries, compile the data, and then publish them. This is a huge part which increasing collaboration, the harmony at the country level, and also working closely with international custodian agencies will definitely increase the availability of data. And the second and the third source of data were household surveys and admin data, which are primary sources of data, but we still see a big gap. There's a lot you can do to increase availability through these two sources by adding questions to existing modules for data collection, by enhancing quality and integrating different sources of administrative data at the country level. In short, we need to do a lot more. We need to invest and enhance collaboration for statistical development at the country level. Over to you, Kavita.
So thank you, Arman. You've been very game in taking on a lot of difficult questions. So colleagues, we will now move on to the sub-region specific sessions. But if you do still have any questions about the region-wide analysis, please feel free to share them in the chat box or send us via email to escap-ckms@un.org, and we will try our best to respond to them. So the links for the 5 sub-regional sessions are in the chat box. To enter your desired sub-regional session, please make sure you first click on the link, and you can then leave this main plenary session. Presenting at the 5 sub-regional sessions are Mr. Ganbol Basanjov on East and Northeast Asia, Nikolai Pomashchenko on North and Central Asia, Ronnie Sokarasma on Southeast Asia, Rajan Ratna on South and Southwest Asia, and Christopher Ryan on the Pacific. So thank you everyone for joining us at the main launch session. See you in the sub-regional breakout rooms.